is another one of those book review marathon days for me because it is just one of those times when I don't have the time, and I hate that I'm having to squeeze them all together 2 weeks after I finished these books. But after writing my notes down, 2 of them are really not that complicated, and then one is, but I'm just not going to get into that much because I don't have the bandwidth to do it. But I believe I'm going to start with Lauren Morrill's Meant to Be. This one has a fun little backstory for me because this was written about 2008, 2009, I believe. And that was around the time that I went to my first writing conference, and she was there, and I was just in complete and total awe over her. And I enjoy to this day when authors attend conferences because they give us really great nuggets of wisdom. I was just soaking it all up, and I was like, hey, let me read this book. Yeah, that was 15 years ago? I remember liking the book. The whole deal of Meant to Be is the main character, Julia, believes in meant to be, and she has a specific meant to be. His name is Mark. They had been childhood friends. He had moved away, but now he's back. However, she cannot bring herself to talk to him. As a young adult, I thought this was genius, and I remember liking it. But reading it now, I think it suffers from 2 problems. One is it is an absolute cliche. It is worthy of a Hallmark movie, and we all know I don't do Hallmark movies. 2, and then that kind of falls in line with, I think I've outgrown this novel, which leads into number 2, in that it feels kind of superficial in its writing. It lacks depth. It's more of a, here's a sweet little romance that is meant for readers who want more fluff than substance. And that doesn't translate well for me. That does not age well for me. It's not a bad book, and it will probably suit the needs of those of you who like a sappy romance. But I got to a certain point in this book that I said, I can't take this anymore. If you want to take every cliche there is and put them into a book, that's what we got. First off, let me just say that Julia is kind of annoying and she's kind of boring. And I don't really understand her. We open with her going on a class trip to London for spring break. And we open with her on the plane, and girl is so judgmental. She is one of those type A, straight A students who knows her own plan, and like nothing's gonna get in her way, and she's like, I have a schedule for everything. And on one hand, that's great. I love an intelligent character, but on the other hand, she felt very one note. And so then when we get into this book and she starts doing things that are contrary to her character, I don't know, we'll get into that. But she's on this plane and she's talking crap about all of her classmates, particularly this one guy named Jason who's the class clown and she cannot stand. And I'm like, my goodness, this girl has no friends. There's nobody on this trip who she likes, nobody on this trip who likes her. And then we find out that she's a swimmer and all of her friends are on the swim team, and she didn't realize that they were going to be at like regionals or nationals or something during this trip. So none of her friends came and she's left all alone. And I'm like, okay, I don't think my high school softball coach would have let that fly. She would have been like, you've got to figure out a way to be here instead. And then her best friend, again, it's that whole idea of the opposites attract. And I really saw no reason for her best friend to even like her. That's when it just goes into that stereotype of she's the boring one, her friend is the fun one, her friend is the one making her do things that she doesn't want to do or pack clothes that she doesn't want to pack because that's not her style. I don't know. I enjoyed the friend because she did give this book a little bit of life, because even though Jason was the class clown, I didn't get him either. He was kind of a caricature, where he's supposed to be this big personality, this rule breaker, this guy who can get away with anything because he's so charismatic. And we do get some insight into his home life, namely that his mother had left him when he was young. But I have no idea what else there is to him and why I should be invested in him. And if you're not going to pick up what I'm putting down here, we know that these two are going to have some kind of a romance, even though he's not the one that she considers her meant to be. To make matters worse, they get paired up and they have no choice in the matter. The teacher, who I was like, she was so strict and rule abiding, and I guess there's a difference between being in high school and going on a week-long trip versus being a college student and doing a study abroad. This woman was such a Nazi. They had to do all of this work and they were not allowed any free time. Their cultural time was for them to explore the city so that they could write papers on it. I know this all sets the stage for Julia to start being a rule breaker, but I found myself quite annoyed at how structured everything was, and that it didn't seem like an enjoyable trip at all. There was a point where I just started skipping ahead because it felt like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. It didn't feel necessarily natural because it's that Hallmark feel of they're gonna have all these romantic moments, all of these moments where she's gonna see things in a new light and it's gonna expand her horizons, and that it was formulaic in that way. But can I actually sideline here to say, when she was on the plane, the kid behind her stuck gum in her ponytail. Then when she gets to the luggage carousel, she sees this kid, only for Jason to come up behind her and give the kid a high five or something. And somehow she puts together the fact that he gave this kid the chewing gum to stick in her hair, which I listened to it, and it wasn't a terrible audiobook, but it was boring all the way around. So I thought the narrator had some moments, but on the whole, I was unimpressed. But while I was listening to it, my impression was that Jason was sitting ahead of her. How did he get the kid gum behind her? When she calls him out on this, he's like, oh, well, you need to loosen up. By having a strange child stick gum in her hair, that does not ring, oh, hey, you need to have a little fun in your life to me, so much as it rings, I'm being a bully and I am causing trauma for you. What if she couldn't get the gum out of her hair? What if she'd had to cut her hair? So then are we going into another stereotype where she's gonna get her glow up? I don't know. Anyways, the teacher says, look, here's a cell phone. You have enough prepaid minutes to call the police or to call me or to call for help. Anything else with this phone is on you. But this phone is not for chatting and calling and texting and social media. But if you're gonna do that, you have to pay for it. They all get their phones. She says, also, here are your room keys, which you have to turn in every single night so that I know you're not sneaking out. They get to the hotel, which is more like a B&B. It's kind of like a boutique hotel more than a B&B. It is run by somebody related to this teacher. In years past, they had stayed at real ganky places, so this was a huge step up, and they were basically the first guests of this hotel, and it was kind of like a trial run. Wouldn't you know it, they all get their own rooms, which I probably loved this when I was 18, 19 years old, because that's a plot device where if they are not sharing a room, if they are not constantly monitored by an authority figure, it means they can do whatever they want. Things that are normally outside the realm of possibility. Julia gets to her room, and I guess she's the only one on this entire trip who has this luxury. She has a freestanding bathtub in her room, and the first thing she says is, I'm taking a bath in that bathtub. I just thought that was so weird. I love a good bathtub. I don't usually take baths, but I mean, I can see the appeal of this bathtub. But again, why is she the only one out of all of these guests who has a freestanding bathtub? And I'm only saying that because when Jason comes to her room, he's like, what the heck? You've got a bathtub. That's cool. I guess these rooms are going to have their own bathrooms rather than like a hostel situation where they would share a bathroom. So I'm like, well, what does he have? Does he have a separate room for his shower? Where's her toilet? I'm pretty sure that Morrill told us all this, but I just got stuck on the bathtub. Anyways, she is like, I'm gonna take my bath, only for Jason to show up, and she had her like face mask stuff and her zit cream on, and I guess this was the point, I think it was, when she was in her bathrobe and she answers the door and he's like, hey, buddy, guess what I've got for us? But he's like mesmerized by the zit cream on her face, and so he makes fun of her for it. And you know what? Let's just chalk it up to high school humor and how that's what boys find funny in high school. Again, I felt like it was very flat in one note. This kid is so mean to her. There was no chemistry between the two of them. So it was very hard for me knowing this guy was going to be a love interest of hers. And I was like, what is it that I'm supposed to be attracted to and rooting for about this guy? Because redheads are not my thing. So his appearance doesn't do it for me. His utter lack of respect for authority doesn't do it for me. The fact that he pushes her to do things she doesn't want to do and he makes fun of her all the time does not do it for me. In theory, I like the idea that he's pushing her boundaries. I think it could have been done in a less severe way. It could have been done from more of a genuine place than of a selfish place. So he's like, met this dude in the bar downstairs. This just goes to what Jason can do, is he can charm anybody, and he has essentially no fear, which again made him more of a caricature than an actual character, because he's never met a stranger. So they've been in London for 4 hours. He's befriended some guy at the bar who's like, my girlfriend's parents are out of town. You should come to our party. Of course, because Julia is his buddy, she has to come with him, to which I say, not in this situation. Like, I get it. This is the key event of the novel, which is what will spur the rest of the novel onward. So Julia has to go to this party. But if we're thinking about it realistically, Jason probably could care less about Julia. He's actually going to invite his friends, his sect of people, because there was really no setup as to why he would then want Julia to come, except that he's the one who's supposed to be pushing her boundaries. But we don't know him yet. We don't know anything about that yet. So why he wants to come to her room and force her to go to a party she doesn't want to go to is beyond me. Julia is like, I'm not doing that. I'm not breaking curfew. That's not the kind of person I am. But then she comes to the conclusion, like, you only live once, why not? And he says, also, on top of befriending this dude in a bar, I convinced the hotel owners to make a spare key for the both of us. So you can hand your key over to our teacher and she'll never know that we left because we have keys to get back in. Okay, come on now. These hoteliers know that they have a group of students from America in their hotel. They're probably not going to be like, this kid I've never seen before, I'm going to give him a spare key to his room. I'm sure they've gotten directive from this teacher or from the school program, but let's move on. So they have spare keys, they go to this party, and Julia decides she's going to be Uber Julia, which means basically Jason abandons her 5 minutes into getting there, and we kind of get this whole sob story about how she's not an attractive girl and no guys are ever into her. And of course, the first guy that would talk to her at this party would be some dopey American who she manages to escape from. Again, we get to this party and automatically Jason leaves her? Why did he invite her? They don't know each other well enough, and we don't know him well enough to know how much he knows her or what his intentions would be for her, that he would coerce her into coming and then say, well, you're on your own. But that's what happens because she doesn't want to feel like the dopey American girl. She escapes the dopey American guy, goes into some kind of a study and encounters real douchey British guy who tries to hit on her, and he's so drunk. So he's trying to pull her off the couch. He loses his balance and he falls into the glass coffee table. At which point, somehow the blame falls on Julia, which, I mean, couldn't we do better? So she proceeds to get drunker and drunker and becomes Uber Julia. She meets this really cute dude, gives him her number. She lies to him. She's from Massachusetts, Michigan. Must be Massachusetts because she tells him that she's from Boston, which is not entirely true. She's like, my rinky-dink town is gonna sound super dumb. So then she tells him she's from Boston, but she's like, that's not good enough either. I'm gonna tell him I'm from Boston, but I'm actually living in New York because I'm a model and I'm here for Fashion Week. From here on, she continues to give all these guys her number, and that's where I was kind of disappointed. I really wanted this first guy, not because he was like some great guy or anything, but everybody else was nameless and faceless. And this one guy is kind of the first person to be attractive, to find her attractive, that she can actually connect with. And, you know, he has made her feel some kind of way, but he becomes a nobody. And I was disappointed with that. All of this goes into, finally, Jason comes and finds her and is like, we gotta get out of here because that girl over there that I've been flirting with, she's got a boyfriend and he's a big dude and he does not like the fact that I've been flirting with her. He grabs her, they get out of there, only for the boyfriend to approach. There's this big shouting match, maybe there's a little shoving, I can't remember. It was 2 weeks ago and this book really isn't worth a mention. Her bag breaks. All of her stuff falls everywhere, including her pocket Shakespeare. Because that's the kind of girl she is. She carries around sharpened pencils and a pencil sharpener just in case, because she doesn't trust pens, but she also has her pocket Shakespeare. None of that is inherently wrong or bad, but because she's such a stereotype, I needed more behind all of this. Also, what falls out is her prepaid phone, of which there's been this big show of her memorizing her phone number. She's unable to gather her belongings, and she doesn't seem too chuffed about it. I know she's drunk, but like, I don't know. And then Jason's like, we don't have time for this. We have got to get out of here. And she's like, but my phone, my phone, my phone. He's like, I've got your phone. So then they go. She wakes up the next morning 100% hungover and feeling like ish. She has a message from Chris. And she's like, who is Chris? And this is apparently why she gave her number to so many people, was because we needed to not know who is texting her. She enlists Jason to help her find Chris. He then is like, well, if I do this for you, you need to write all of my papers. They strike a deal. And this is about the time that I lost interest. They go to the MoMA. I mean, like, I laugh because I relate. She is feeling so terrible. And then, golly, I feel like this is super inappropriate. She's sitting by a certain statue. I can't remember what it's called. I think it was the Kiss. She's just trying not to vomit everywhere. And her teacher comes and sits next to her. And I guess she's like the one ray of light in this trip for this teacher, because everybody else is a stereotypical teenager. The teacher starts getting really innuendo-y, not graphic, but really heated regarding this statue and the way that nobody can appreciate these certain things about it. And Julia's like, and scene. I just thought it was wildly inappropriate for this teacher to speak this way to her 17, 18-year-old student, especially because she's supposed to be so uptight. Maybe it was a momentary loss of sanity because she has nobody to relate to on this trip because she's more of a child wrangler than anything else. Julia escapes the teacher and her phone rings and it's Chris. Jason's there and he answers the phone for her, but they've had this huge like romantic scuffle, after which they have the whole let's fall down on top of each other moment in the middle of the MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art. And I'm like, okay, Julia, I know you were uber Julia last night, and I know you're super hungover now, but you're not uber Julia now. You know better. So why are you all over him trying to get this phone? It just doesn't make sense. She continually recognizes that she has bad behavior and she's behaving contrary to her true self. But I was like, you've had one rebel without a cause moment. Yet this is what you're doing the day after when you know better? He answers the phone and it's a great moment of misdirect because for me, if we're assuming Chris is a guy and then another guy answers the phone, well, Chris is going to get suspicious, but whatever the interaction was, it was kind of so out of left field. I guess Chris can be so thrown off that Chris is not going to say anything or think twice about why some man is answering the phone. The two of them get in trouble. Their teacher sentences them to an educational period in which they have to find some place that speaks to them. And this is when I was like, and cut. They went to some kind of a skate park, took pictures in a classic British phone booth, had a moment. I don't know. They get back to the hotel and Julia's getting some messages from one of the other girls on the trip, which are insinuating that she essentially needs to back off of Jason, like it's not gonna work. We move forward. I couldn't tell you what happened because I didn't listen to it. But then we get to the moment when Mark Bixford shows up. Julia is a swimmer. She is on the rooftop pool getting some laps in, only to rise out of the water and see her crush. Mark Bixford had been her BFF when they were children. He'd moved away sometime in elementary school, and now he's been back for a year or two. And she, for some reason, can't pluck up the courage to talk to him. I'm like, well, if he was your BFF, the least you could do is at least be like, hey, what's up? I get it. When you think someone's super hot, that's not so easy to do. But when you have a reason to, I guess her rationale is that he may have forgotten about her. It just makes this book that much more hallmarky. Her best friend has told her that he has declared his undying love for her, which really was that she overheard him talking to his friend about how the most beautiful girl in school wanted to hang out and he rejected her because she wasn't his type. She wasn't going to do it for him. So that meant he was in love with Julia. Whatever. We don't actually dwell on this too much, surprisingly. But anyways, she rises out of the water and she comes face to face with Mark and she's like, what are you doing here? Because they're 2-3 days, like they're halfway into this trip. He tells her it's his dad who, he's a photographer of sorts, was offered a job, and because he also knows the teacher's connection to this hotel, this connection was like, you guys can stay here too. I don't remember if it was a family affair or he just decided to come with his dad. I mean, I guess theoretically, I would have taken up that opportunity because why not? But at the same time, I'm like, dude, it takes like an entire day to recover from the jet lag. You have maybe 4 days to be here. Whatever. They make plans to hang out and she's like, oh my gosh, I'm going on a date with Mark Bixford. Jason shows up. Oh, that reminds me. It might have been this moment. It might have been earlier with the whole bathtub thing and the zit cream. Some instance, she's in her robe and he is messing with her. He purposefully steps on the hem of her robe, which you know what that's going to lead to. He doesn't see anything, and we have this whole really awkward moment of her hiding underneath her robe, curled in a ball, and I was just like, would this have impressed me when I was 18 or 19? Because it doesn't impress me now. It's predictable. We could have done something else that was a magic moment of sorts. Anyways, she's been hanging out with Jason. They've been connecting, even though at the same time she feels like he only wants to talk to her when nobody else is around. He just kind of has this double standard for their relationship. But he shows up and he's like, oh, Mark Bixford. He invites himself out on their date. At some point, Mark makes some kind of a move on her. I don't know if Jason was there or not, but he makes some kind of a move on her that puts her off. From then on, she's totally over Mark Bixford, and we don't hear a single thing from him. What we do learn is he's a douche. That's the kind of girl that meets his needs, is somebody that he can mess around with. He has no respect for women whatsoever. I am sure I missed a lot. I think I got like 5 chapters in, maybe, before I skipped, and then I think I skipped to the last 4th of the novel. So I know I missed some things. But there was a little too much going on for this length of a novel. It just goes back to the way that it lacked depth, because she could not explore all these avenues in the time period she had, the physical length of her book. Not that it took place in 1 week, but the fact that it's not a very large book. For the extent that we have built Mark Bixford up, I would have expected a little bit more about him and gotten to dive into him as a character. Instead, he's the stereotypical hot guy who you think is the one for you, and then he's not. And then the dude that you would never give the time of day turns out to be your MTB. She's continually getting messages from Chris. I guess she's answering them back, but honestly, if I were Chris, I would have given up by this point. Why does Chris continue to pursue Julia? Only so many times that you can either not get a response, you can get an unsatisfactory response, that your attempts to meet up do not come to fruition. I would have been like, dude, I'm out. But for the sake of the novel, Chris hangs in there. Julia and Jason share a kiss. She then admits, and I think that was actually before Mark showed up or after. I don't know. I don't remember. It doesn't matter. But she does realize that she's in love with Jason, or at least she has feelings for Jason. She then texts this to her BFF, who never responds. They have been able to chat over the internet, like their form of Zoom, because as I said, this was in the early 2000s, so a lot of things were not available then. There's another girl on this trip, and this is when the whole phone thing just blows my mind. This other girl on the trip who lives on her phone, and I think Twitter was the thing then. She's living her life through Twitter, and she gets caught. So this is when they're at the MoMA. She gets caught texting. Oh, and then the teacher takes her phone and then sees the numerous phone cards in this girl's bag. I don't remember if Julia snagged some of them or whatever, but she's been racking up some minutes of her own, and she's like, I'm not this kind of person. I can't believe I'm breaking the rules. Whatever. Now she's all worried about if her teacher is going to see her bill or something. I don't think that's the way that prepaid phones work. I mean, kind of, but that's besides the point. She is kind of worried about her extensive phone use. She gets a text from Chris. So she's had this huge blowout with Jason because he, as I said, he's really mean to her. And she bites back, bringing up personal things in his life, like the way his mother abandoned him. They go their separate ways, and she is like, okay, got this message from Chris, I'm gonna go meet Chris. She shows up at the designated place and time. There's no one that she recognizes. There is the girl that Jason had been flirting with. So at a certain point in time, they just start chatting. They both apparently have been stood up. They both have been chatting with people they don't really know. And if you are not following along, ladies and gentlemen, this girl is Chris. And Julia had Jason's phone, and Jason apparently had Julia's phone. For some reason, my thought with this whole book is he did it on purpose because he'd had a crush on her coming into the whole thing. Which I don't know why he would have a crush on her, because she was incredibly boring. Is she attractive? I couldn't tell you. But by her personality, she was not that attractive. And then my other perception was that when her bag broke and she lost all of her items, he was so desperate to get out that he lied and told her his phone was hers just to get her out of there. But apparently he somehow located her phone and mixed them up. And so when we get to this moment, I'm like, why did it matter that she had her phone number memorized? Did that come to help her whatsoever? Except to say that she knows her dad's old Jersey number, she knows her really weighty GPA, and she knows Shakespeare's birthday. Now we get the impression that all of the texts that she's been sending to her best friend, they haven't been answered because her best friend doesn't know who's been texting her. And I guess she's been texting Jason. And now Julie's like, oh my gosh, what does he know? And I'm like, why didn't the best friend just say, who is this? If I'm consistently getting text messages from somebody I do not know, I would ask and be like, who is this? Anyways, that's not what happens. Julia breaks it to Chris. She's like, actually, I'm the one you've been texting, but I do know the guy that you thought you were texting. I forget what happens, but Mark shows up and Chris is exactly his type, which, by the way, she had since broken up with her boyfriend. But Mark shows up and he's like, hey, hot mama. He knocks Julia out of her chair because even though he was the love of her life, he was absolutely perfect, all of a sudden he can do nothing right. He is a selfish, arrogant guy. They're doing their thing, only for Jason to show up. She's like, yeah, figured it out. You had my phone, I had yours, blah, blah, blah. They express their feelings for each other, and then that's that. Really simple plot, really simple writing. If you like that kind of thing, if you like a really sweet, lighthearted romance, you very well might like Meant to Be. But I was bored to tears. And I feel terrible because I was so in awe of Lauren Morrill. I not wanted to be her so much as I wanted to know her. She was about my age. I thought it'd be great to be in a writing community with her. I hate the fact that this book did not age well. And I would really love to know if you guys have read it and what you think about it, because I guess there's a personal attachment to it, and I would never want an author to watch one of my reviews because they would be so discouraged. And I don't mean to be discouraging, but I tell it like I see it. And some books, like the writing could just be better. Not a bad idea, but the execution was flawed. There we go. Do you have any romance books you think I might like? I recently saw someone on TikTok who wrote something that I would like to read, because is essentially what happened after the Hallmark movie ends. I'm like, I'll read that because it just doesn't make sense. Why would somebody who has worked so hard for what they have throw it all away for, in essence, nothing? For a one-horse town and a guy who she hasn't spoken to in 15 years? I understand realizing that what you thought you wanted is not actually what you want, but at some point it's like, how did you not know you were this miserable? Whatever. That's today's book review, and I will see you again for another book.